my guest this week is Mohit Tiwari, Professor Mohit Tiwari, who is co-founder and CEO of Symmetry Systems. Mohit, your entry into the cybersecurity industry was through academia 10, 12 years ago when you started trying to figure out first principles for data security. Can you take a step back and talk about, your initial interest in this space and what prompted this focus on cybersecurity?
My background is that I was doing a PhD at UC Santa Barbara at the time, and since then I moved to Berkeley for a couple of years and then to UT for a faculty position. And all the way through, I was just very, very keen on an area called information flow control. And it's this whole very long-term area, about 50 years of research has gone into it, around how is information flowing through your system. And system here means your endpoint device, your cloud, your applications, all the SaaS services, right? And the whole goal is that can you ask questions about data, in a way that is independent of what applications or systems it flows through. Super interesting area. I was working on this, and the applications were endless. People apply this for core security problems, and I personally, around 2011, got very interested in applying it to access control and privacy related questions. The whole goal is very simple. If, Ryan, I send you a message, I want to know only you saw that message, right? But now take this from a message to any application, right? You can do this for Signal, using Signal for messages, but now think about medical applications. I shared something with a doctor or my family member, only they see it, right? Move it to financial applications, move it to other kinds of personal applications. How can you refactor privacy out of, other business logic that it's all over the app. So that's
right. Can you linger a little bit on the information flow control concept? What was the impetus for research in this area? You said there was a lot of previous research, and then over the last 8 to 10 years, you and your team you advanced it as well. Define this information flow control within the context of, a prior world that you were researching prior to cloud, prior to this digital transformation we've seen, and how it translates into these first principles that you've seen now as our networks become more disparate and, complex.
That's really interesting. Information flow control is actually very, very simple. You want, if you think about even personal questions, like I said, I sent Ryan, some health information. I want to know only Ryan. So I think this is the goal. The same thing if, replace me with an organization running a compliance program. I want to know that EU data only lived in EU. It didn't travel through any service to non-EU places, right? This is like a very common compliance.
Right.
You can move into security questions. You say that, hey, Okta had a big breach. They had to answer, is customer data affected? Some contractor somewhere, those credentials or laptop got compromised. Is there a path from there to customer data, right? And specifically,
and not only answering that question, but answering it in a timely manner. Because I'm glad you bring up the Okta example, because what we found out in the Okta example is that the true postmortem came a month and a half later. And they had already got caught up into problems around disclosure and so on, because identifying this blast radius in a timely manner becomes complicated. And that's our current status, right?
Yes, exactly. So I think this question, that's why this is the most attractive part about information flow control is, you can change the actual questions, right? But the shape of the questions is always what happened to this data, even though many different identities acted on it or many different applications acted on it. What's going on with the data? That's the shape of the question, whether I as an individual am asking it or whether companies are asking it. So that's where as an academic, you're always looking for okay, what's the one place to strike a hammer where if you make a dent, you sort of, you have huge impact. So I, as with all the people who worked on the space for 50 years, they all were sort of chasing after this dream that, how can we make information flow control really practical, and practical in a way that it doesn't burden the cloud providers or infrastructure people. It doesn't burden the application developers. It doesn't burden me as a user. My questions should remain simple. These kind of things. So there's a whole much more detailed design space around making it operational, right? How do you bring it to life?
Right. When and how did this research project and all the work at UT, University of Texas at Austin, when did the flip switch in your head that, you know what, we might have a solution here, we might have a problem, this is, there's a problem statement that needs to be asked, this information flow control concept is heavily fleshed out. Give me what was the tipping point in your head that, you know, we can make something out of this?
That's it.
And how does that work with the university? Just help the audience understand. Like, how does that work when a research project comes out of a lab and then it's heading to be commercialized? Walk me through a little bit of that.
Nice. So those are like almost two kind of back-to-back questions that are really interesting. So for me, I would say that this project was I mean, the first step was just finding collaborators who get into it as much
Right.
as you, so that now you just are not doing anything else. You're kind of just really, living in this.
This is, you're still
This
at
is
UT.
at UT. So I ran into my
Right.
current co-founder and ex graduate student Kason around 2012, 2013 timeframe. We did a project around information flow in the hardware, and then around 2015 we sort of both committed, and then I had to find one more person to help add bandwidth. So I found my brother and asked him to sort of join forces. So Kason, me, and Puneet, my brother, we sort of banded together and committed to let's go try to build something, make this real. And the-
So, but back up to when did you know that there was something here to be
right.
built? Was there like a first principles tipping point? Was there something in computing that happened that moved it from this 50 years and 50 years of prior research, another 10 years of you guys doing this? What triggered this idea that there's something here?
Right. So I think that's the biggest tipping point to me. Just was almost not even about information flow. It is that we could see that applications were moving towards Docker was pretty big already by that time in
Right.
2015. Your Linux containers are morphing into much more usable forms, and people are chopping things up into microservices. You can see the first set of orchestration frameworks had already been out, and Kubernetes was just about to start. So it was sort of in the air that big monolithic applications like like Office 365 type of applications, or the classic of.
And you guys had already seen this coming? I mean, you had predicted this as part of your research that you knew that microservices and this was going to be the next,
So in the
the
research line,
logical
it was
place for you.
almost a done deal already, right? If you look at,
Okay.
I think Mesosphere was the first orchestration project, came out of Berkeley. That's another example of, academic research making it into production. It was collaboration
Right,
at
right.
Twitter, I think. And yeah, I think, I mean, at Berkeley at least, so I was there 2011 through 13, and it was sort of like in the air that you could essentially get applications shipped as microservices in containers. It's just good for, it's like
Right, right.
inexorable gravity pulling the world towards that. A lot of details were to be worked out. So as a result, like when we built the first version of what we call data containers, where you're orchestrating data inside containers instead of applications,
Mhm.
right? And you do it in a
Right.
way that, so we worked on that project, but I think this tipping point that you could just take big, useful, hairy applications and easily inject a new orchestration layer below it, this was possible. Now you can get really creative with
Right.
what is in that box. Is it one monolithic kind of like application functionality, or is it that thing chopped up into small pieces, right? Each handling small pieces of data at the time. You can just get really creative. So this
Right,
orchestration
right.
frameworks, I think, was the main tipping point, and microservices.
Right. And just quickly, how does it work? Does the university encourage this? Does the
Yeah.
like help me understand like how does a university research project gets commercialized and what's the structure of how that
So yeah, I
works?
can walk through our story. I think broadly, I would say at UT Austin. So again, this is very specific to each university. I think
Hmm,
at
hmm.
UT, the whole charter was have impact. Right when you join as an assistant professor,
Right.
they're not prescriptive about it, and we spent a lot of time. We found, so our story was that we found a hospital, Dell Children's Hospital. They handle complex care problems for kids, right? And their whole mantra was healthcare happens outside the hospital. It had to, because the kids going to a special needs school, there's social workers, school nurses. So they can't have a HIPAA compliant EMR app locked into a hospital desktop server.
Right. And this was your first prototype,
it's not-
or this was just as part of the research?
this
Okay.
was kind of our goal. Like we started working here, did a lot of work. So at that point, we knew we wanted to push it out, but we didn't really like trigger patent offices and all of this stuff. So we did
Right,
this
right.
foundational work as open research, right? And then
Okay.
around 2019 or so, we were like, okay, we need to spin out. So there was a clean kind of break off point where we said, okay, here are all these ideas, prototypes, these are all in the public domain. And now let's go try to build something more custom, kind of more closed domain, just to figure out right how it would work inside the company.
And what is that custom thing? Let's get into a little bit of the product now. So you've come out of UT,
Right.
got some startup funding you got some venture capital startup funding, and now you have your first principles in place. You had your first prototype built out. Now we're getting ready to commercialize this. What does the product look like now, and what does it do?
Right. So we have morphed it quite a bit over the last 2.5 years. When we came out, it was kind of native to a containerized ecosystem, right? Containerized workloads.
Right.
What we learned, so we met Will Lin, he's at ForgePoint, Byron Alsberg at Prefix. So both of these folks had really good kind of network of CISOs or security practitioners that we talked to. And what we learned is, I mean, containers are great, but the cycle is slow of mass adoption. There is a huge
Right.
movement that is only now still going on just to the classic, EC2, S3 classic cloud, not even the containerized part of the cloud. So we just rethought our plumbing to be okay, instead of only focusing on containerized workloads, let's make it available to just general, classic cloud workloads. And we essentially we call this product now Data Guard, right? And it's a very systematic walk through the NIST kind of life cycle of protection mechanisms. You come in, whether it is network applications or now data, you have to sort of identify, get visibility into the problem, and then move into either protection, detection, response, and so on. So we built the product such that you start with visibility, right? Get sort of strategic
Right.
awareness of where is your most valuable data, how is it protected today, right? Where do you actually need intervention, and then help make the interventions, whether it is detect, right? Sometimes you can't change what you have. You just can only put
Right.
seatbelts. And sometimes you actually can go in and change, like, oh, genomic data should never be here, here, and here. Let's go move it, lock it down, things like this. So you can actually go into a protect motion as well.
Right. Right. I'm glad you brought up the NIST framework, because I was going to ask you about another one that I use, which is the Cyber Defense Matrix out of
Yes.
Sunil Yu. It's basically the same thing, but just like a simplification of the grid
Right.
format. What I'm hearing here is with your product, there's way to even disrupt the framework. In a way, it disrupt the framework and give security folks the ability to answer these questions, even if they don't own the data, or even if they're not responsible for even protecting that bit of data. I'm not sure I'm framing the question
Yes.
correctly, but can you talk a little bit about how you view your data guard symmetry systems fitting into disrupting these frameworks?